Hey everybody, it's Master Gallengeist here, bringing you my review for Iron Man issue 21. And I actually really enjoyed this one. It is a nice kind of setup for the next kind of arc that they're doing with Iron Man, of getting him on the whole kind of trail of this like black market kind of thing going on. And it is just a kind of fun one to a degree. I wasn't it wasn't that I was expecting it to be bad or anything, but I'm like, okay, this is kind of interesting. So we see that Tony's like trying to get back into reality from rehab and just kind of get around people, and the noise, the busyness, it's a welcome kind of distraction for him. And we see him kind of like dealing with like how he's flying out on a plane and like in first class, but like around people, having to deal with like alcohol being around, asking for pretty much tomato juice, as this one woman is talking about the whole gorilla incident, and then how this dude, like these two guys had this idea, and like one of them like burnt off his face or whatnot, and Tony's just like, uh-huh, yep, okay. But let's see, she's thinking about how like that person would like pick themselves right back up, get back to work and everything, talking about like mistakes and everything. And then this one dude is like robbing something from the plane, and then of course Tony's like, yep, all right. He gets his armor on in time as the dude's like shooting a fucking gun in an airplane as things banging off. He's like, shit, why the fuck did you have to kind of get involved? He utilizes this kind of, I think, EMP kind of device, because it shuts down the control of the plane and Iron Man's armor enough for a little bit, as he's like, you should have just, this is all on you, man. And then of course Tony pretty much is trying to figure out what's going on with his suit and the plane. His suit's pretty much up before the plane, as he's helping more of the passengers kind of like get into a better kind of position of like getting their kind of masks on and everything. He tries to get a situation in the plane, and honestly, you're like, okay, these pilots would probably know who Tony Stark / Iron Man would be, but they're trying to make sure that a plane doesn't crash at the moment, so I kind of give them the benefit of the doubt on that one. And they're pretty much able to do that, but the thing is, the dude's like, hey, that guy who just stole that shit, that's top secret weapon plans. So he then again makes sure and checks, and then goes out of the plane to go after the dude. He's able to have Boss kind of paint a target, so that way there's a GPS on the dude before he shoots some shit at him. And he pretty much dodges everything for the most part, except for like his boot gets hit. He's like, ah, shit. As he then tumbles down, he loses pretty much flight control, and he gets pretty injured, but it doesn't, like, the femoral artery's intact and everything. And he finds out that it's adamantium, and his like talking about it like very chic, very nice, very chic, love it. And he then of course makes a tourniquet and everything like that. And of course, he does also kind of think about what would be going on if he wanted certain kind of things, like for the morphine. But of course, he's kind of like putting that out of his head as he's trying to do what he needs to do. And of course, he gets Boss to say, listen, you don't want to fly with this shit because it'll probably explode. He's like, okay, can't fly. No GPS, no nav, just the compass. And instead of painting it to north, he decides to paint the biosignature and go after the dude, get a beat on the DB Cooper's kind of sequel dude, which I think is kind of funny, because it is an interesting kind of setup of being like, okay, DB Cooper's this dude who did on plane kind of thing, and then parachuted out in the middle of nowhere, and nobody's able to kind of like figure out what kind of happened with him. And of course, the mystery dude's like, huh, so we're gonna do this. Fucking billionaires. Alright, and he's talking about how it's getting hot, and he's like, the AC system's failing. And then the dude's like, hey, how you faring up here? Love the fresh air. As he then hits him with this like metal tipped log thing that he's got, and it bangs the shit out of him. He's like, oh, okay, you're more of an indoor kid. So what do I call you, Happy Capper, the bear who shit in the woods? It's just like, yes, okay, you got Tony there. That just works. He's like, those are good, but I was in the Weapon X program, they called me Switchback. It's like, oh, okay. And then he's like, that explains the adamantium. And the Switchback wants the armor, but then he kind of like blasts him. He's like, oh yeah, I'm state of the art, but then he falls into a fucking hole. It's like, Tony, you gotta watch that shit. So he just kind of like leaves him in there. this is where he was thinking about the whole kind of morphine and how like he's probably waiting him out to starve so that way he can like collect the armor and shit. And then it starts raining. It's like, ah, shit, this fucking kind of sucks. But then he starts remembering stuff from rehab and how, like, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change. And then he starts kind of, like, getting some water from the rain. And dude's like, ah, shit, he's going to drown in that armor. And he doesn't want it to stink like a dead dude, which... I get that. Like, that's a pretty salient point for, like, Switchback to kind of bring up. It's like, yeah, I could wait him out and see if he drowns, but then that's going to be a stinky armor, and I kind of don't want that. He's like, yeah, just lose the armor and I'll pull you out. I mean, there's a highway, like, 30 miles east. Just, let's do this. Unless that thing can do a scuba thing. And then he's just pretty much talking to himself as Tony pretty much gets the beat on him from the back and kicks him in the hole, and has his armor pretty much restrain him. He's like, yeah, my armor could pretty much work because I could pretty much stand on it and get out of the hole, you dillweed. Let's see. Alright. Then he, of course, checked out the plans. It was plans for, like, a mad bomb. Seems a little bit woodsy to kind of be going for that one. It's like, yeah. And, of course, he sells the weapons. He doesn't build them. He needs the money to prepare for, like, the end of the world. It's going to be wild and shit. How money plus violence turns life as we know it into ash. Tony's like, fuck your nihilism. You're leaving me down here? What a hero. He's like, this is your shit. And, of course, he name-dropped this thing, Source Control. So Tony just kind of bugs out. Since he can now figure out that 30 miles due east, I mean, he just has to go that far. So then a couple days later, we see that Tony's pretty much talking with Rhodey. And he brings up the whole Source Control. It's an international black market for weapons and shit. And he encountered one of the operators. Rhodey's like, alright, what's going on for that? And he's going to put every dollar he has into buying everything and pretty much dismantling all the weapons. It's like, it's actually not a bad idea. I'll have to see what goes on. Now, granted, using all of your money to do that, that still kind of works because Tony could just invent something or do some other kind of thing. Or just get somebody else to kind of help him and do those kind of things all at once. And of course, Rhodey's like, are you looking to get it kicked out of the Avengers on that stuff? It's like, no, I wanted to do it bloodless. And, of course, going in bright red and gold, that's going to have casualties and shit. And he's thinking, oh, you're thinking of going in alone again. He's like, no, that's why I asked you for help. That's what I learned in rehab and all that. It's like, yep, all right. And he's the only one he trusts and trusts him the most. He's like, all right, I like it because the idea of no fights or getting hurt. But Tony's like, oh, there's probably going to be fights and we're probably going to get hurt, but yeah. And then, of course, he brings up that they're going to need a front man, someone who's trustworthy, that he was thinking of Vic Martinelli, and Vic called Rhodey as well, and that's why Rhodey knows about Source Control. He was bad. He's like, good, he's already inside, but Vic's dead, as we learned from Rhodey. It's like, ah, shit. So, I kind of like this because it was an interesting kind of setup of just, okay, Tony, like, this has worked to do some kind of weird shit, like Tony fighting a gorilla with just his roller skates. This, where it's kind of like weird airplane heist and it links to some other kind of conspiracy that works later on. It was just a kind of overall fun thing that didn't have a lot of action, but it had enough action that worked very well of Tony figuring out how to get out of his situation and get the drop on Switchback and how that would kind of work out. It's like, yeah, there you go. That's actually a kind of cool thing. While setting up this different kind of scenario that he's going to try and do this as bloodlessly as possible by buying all these weapons and destroying them. So it'll be interesting to see how that kind of goes out and how that works. So those are my opinions on the issue. Tell me what you guys think in the comments below. If you liked it, if you didn't like it, if you agree with me, if you disagree with me. Also like and subscribe, and I hope you have a good day.